welcome to Property Quorum. Now, the sharper-eyed amongst you will notice we're a little bit light on populace today. However, we are, in fact, joined by what might be referred to as two of the founder members, Hamish McClay of Search Convey and Chris Gilston of Root Home. And we often discuss on this show various aspects of the property market that can give pause. We certainly are no different today. We are focusing on rent and what I've often referred to as generation rent. So without further ado, I'd like to start the show off by talking about the proposition, which is high rents and the corporate grip on renting. And to start us off, as per usual, Hamish McClay.
Well, it's something we speak about, or have been speaking about of late, because it does appear to be something which is increasing the, if you like, the reducing number of landlords, but the increasing number of properties held by the more corporate landlords, if you like, those sort of companies. I mean, there's an interesting aspect too. The number of people who've actually sort of developed companies to buy properties has also increased to a certain extent, but not, they've only done it because of the tax situation which has arisen. But the whole topic that we want to sort of speak about today is how much of an influence on the cost of living is that impact of the more corporate landlord going to be, because there does seem to be a great more regularity in terms of the way the corporate landlord will increase prices, and also the fact that it's not just the sort of the general sort of rental prices. It is getting more expensive for a landlord actually to run the place. However, it makes no difference whether it's a corporate landlord or whether it's one that's running a sort of smaller business. The pressure is actually being put on residents all the time. And we really are, we're short of properties. And of course, that doesn't help with the prices either. So it's one of those, we're in a delicate sort of situation and have been for some time, but made more difficult by the taxation which has come in, and also what's going to be happening in a couple of years' time. So are the corporates going to be controlling and creating much, much higher rents, really? That's the question.
Chris, as ever, welcome to the show. It's this, as I said in the green room, appears to be right in your wheelhouse. You are, on the positive side from your perspective, able to mop up all those many landlords that are disappearing from the marketplace. But from the negative aspect, it's becoming more and more expensive just to run a company like yours. At what point do you think to yourself, this is a tipping point?
I think we're in it already, to be honest, Gareth. I think that the tipping point really happened when George Osborne brought in the quite damaging regulatory changes to the tax regime back in 2015.
Right.
And most landlords didn't necessarily spot the potential impact to them and the ongoing damage it could have on their portfolio if they continue to have lending finance in place. Which effectively taxed them on loans, which no other loans are not taxable in any other circumstance in any other part of the world. So it was quite a bold move, and it's quite surprising it was not resisted further. And it's still quite astonishing it's still not been repealed. But that's where it's at this point in time, and as a result of that, we are now seeing landlords getting taxed on their lending, on their mortgages, and it's having an impact on many landlords, causing them to go negative on their monthly income statements. So they're in a position to think, well, why continue? Now, the net effect of that, and this is impacting people who hold property in their personal name, which is a huge amount. I mean, when back in 2015, we're now at maybe like 86% of the private rental sector is private landlords. It was probably much bigger at that point in time. There's been a mass exodus of the market, and it's still ongoing. The next logical step for these landlords is, well, what do I do? It's, do I incorporate? Do I get the lending off all the stock that's in my own name and incorporate it if I want to continue?
Right.
Or do I just sell up? And lots of them are doing a combination of those different things. But in the event that it's selling up, they're freeing up their capital and getting out of the market, which potentially could reduce supply. If they're not selling on to another investor, they could be selling on to first-time buyers, second-time buyers, that type of thing, who end up kicking tenants out and living in that property themselves. So in that instance, that reduces the amount of supply. In the event that they are selling up, it could be someone like me that comes along who is, for all intents and purposes, a small-time operator. I'm certainly not a big corporate or anything like that. But the prevalence that we're seeing now is that there is huge amounts of money coming into the markets looking to acquire UK-based assets from and it's trickling down from the top through these corporate entities, these big entities, and they are really big, and they're just looking to hoover up assets. So they have access to huge amounts of cash, and they are just buying left, right, and centre. Now, the challenge that people have, I mean, there's a downwards pressure on tenants. There's a constant downwards pressure on the people. So whether it's regulatory or whether it's restriction of supply, it always impacts the people who are at the bottom, who are using effectively the customers, the service users. So any tax changes, any regime changes, any regulatory changes, the downward pressure, it always comes on down to the person who is the final person who's writing the checks or purchasing the product or the service. And in this instance, it's the people who are renting. So the downward pressure on them is that if we start to have almost monopolizations of the supply chain to the extent where, well, we have, for example, I think we shared an article or discussed an article previously where there's in South London or West London, there are certain corporate entities who are purchasing housing estates. So their leverage over the people who are their customers at that point, that they can set the rules to some extent. So and there are some quite horrific stories that are coming out of the renters in these different scenarios that they're saying, well, rents have gone up significantly, or ground rents have gone up significantly, or these situations are becoming more onerous, or we're getting kicked out even though it's long-term social housing. It's like, well, how are these big organisations managing to skirt around what are clearly defined statutes and regulations which they should be abiding by? So, and I guess it boils down to that because of their size and their corporate nature, that they will put profit over everything else, absolutely everything else, and they have the capacity and the financial wherewithal to be able, and the legal departments to be able to tie people up in knots for decades. So it's like, well, it's effectively who's got the bigger gun. So that's kind of the position where the market seems to be drifting to at the moment, which is quite a disappointing state of affairs.
I mean, I've just done a little bit of research in the back end. It says that in early 2025, from Spare Room, that about 1/3 of landlords plan to exit the sector altogether in the coming year, 2026. And another survey has found that 67% of landlords, that's slightly over 2/3, plan to either leave, reduce portfolios, or switch to short-term holiday lets.
Yes, yeah, which are staggering numbers. I mean, if talking about those reflecting on the impact on the PRS, it's how much is supply going to be reduced further, and of the remaining supply, how much of that is going to be pushed into the hands of the corporate landlords, who are just going to benefit from the things like the recent rent reform regulations that have come through Parliament, because they're effectively they've got an iron grip on the tenant base. The tenants think that they've gained additional rights in these scenarios. I'm not sure that's the case. I think that actually the corporate corporate landlords have got a bigger stick to beat people with, and that's a problem. That's really challenging. So we're moving to a more draconian style of system, and by creating monopolies in terms of the supply chain, we're creating a problem for ourselves and our future renters and our children further down the line.
It also seems to me that if you know a very small number of corporates end up owning everything, it's not like you can go compare rents in different places. They'll all be covered by the same basic rules, and because by definition, as you say, they'll be probably more draconian. It means that you'll have less flexibility or ability to argue your case. Spencer Collins, friend of the show, says, "How long will the UK keep pretending that the rent crisis is just market forces when corporate landlords are locking cities into brutal prices, gaming the system, sidestepping real EPC upgrades that could or would cut bills for renters but slash their profit margins?" What say you, Chris?
Yeah, it's an ongoing one, and I feel really despondent. We keep going a bit political on this show, but I just feel really despondent with the state of affairs with the Labour government that's meant to be representing the people, and they're acting almost like ultra conservatives. It's just off the charts, like in terms of their policies and how they're behaving, and they're feeding into the hands of these corporate entities. They're not really very representative of the people, which is quite astonishing.
Hamish, I see you there nodding away in the background. It just seems to me that we are heading towards a precipice, after which point it will be corporate rent day.
Well, I don't think it's so much a precipice, because I think Chris mentioned we're pretty well there. We're actually in not so much a void, but we're in a very difficult spot, and you don't know which way to step. Interesting there, we haven't actually mentioned it earlier, but people are beginning to think, well, anybody that's investing has to think medium to long term. And with various other things which have happened, bearing in mind we're only a third of the way through the sort of proposition under this particular sort of government, we don't know what might be changed next. There's additional costs being added in for anybody that has a rental property. And that EPC, the energy performance of that particular property, is one of those big things. You can only do so much about it, however, and it's very, very difficult on those slightly older properties. And as we know, there is a little bit of frustration with people when they look at the quality of some of the properties already. We know we've got a load of properties sort of out of the mix at the moment because they're undergoing remediation. The sad aspect is, and of course it's really a topic for tomorrow, but the sad aspect is this remediation is at such a low standard that unfortunately, when the people get back into their properties, all that remediation is completed, the prices are going to go up and up. So there's a lot of inconvenience, there's a lot of instability because the properties are not becoming available. And as we well know with these new rules, if you want to sell your property, basically you can't do anything with it in effect for sort of 12 months. So there's just going to be a few more empty properties while people are getting, we know how long conveyancing takes. So unfortunately, we know what's happened to conveyancing with a number of these larger corporates sort of coming in. The pressure is there, and they are looking, again, like Chris has intimated, they're looking to improve profits. It's not so much that it's going to benefit, in fact, very rarely does it actually benefit the person who's buying or selling the property. It's not speeding that up. It's how you go about it that speeds it up. The people you work with that speed it up. So there's a combination of a number of things, and people are looking at this and they're viewing it to say, nah. The corporates think, well, that's absolutely fine as far as we're concerned, because we can actually sort of just buy a few more flats within that building. We can actually sort of buy it away from what was possibly in some cases social housing, because some of the councils are suffering sort of greatly. And in many instances now, what's actually happening, and this is again pushing the prices up, that the councils are having to pay for properties, because allowing the build of properties, there's not enough low price properties being made available. And unfortunately, as a consequence of that, what's sort of happening there is making it more and more difficult for the poor soul that has a limited, a limited salary, a limited income. I mean, some of these, as we well know, there are people who want to work and are working, but there's more and more difficult to find the place at a reasonable sort of rent, particularly when you look at some of these places in London. So it's, the sort of work that Chris and his team at Root Home do is so vital. And what we want to do is encourage that. However, we do need other aspects to be running much more smoothly at the same time.
Chris, it appears to me that no matter which way we strike out at the moment, it's inexorable that there'll be more corporate interest. And eventually, I see almost corporatized villages, towns, and even cities. What do you think? Is there a way we can pull back from this? Well, Hamish doesn't want to call it a precipice, but from this point of no return.
I mean, what you described, Gareth, sounds like a dystopian nightmare to me. I
wouldn't want to comment.
I think yes, there is, but it requires people to actually get up and make a difference and choose to do something differently. And I think there's a lot of apathy out there. I'm quite despondent about the state of affairs. So yeah, it's possible. Yeah, it's possible, but it may not happen. But given where things are at this point in time, it is worth highlighting that the situation could get substantially worse for people if they don't choose to get up and make a change. Not to want to sound like a Michael Jackson song. But yeah, I think I think that there's definitely scope for improvements in the system. I think it does could potentially start at a grassroots level more than anywhere. There needs to be some upheaval and pushback. That, like I've already, to repeat to myself, like I've already said, the challenge with the corporatization and the monopolization of these different industries, certainly with housing, is that if you've got people controlling to a huge extent where the roof over your head, you're very much a prisoner. If you step out of line, and people should feel safe and respected in their home, and know that they're not going to get turfed out onto the streets just for stepping out of some sort of corporate policy that has been enacted by some sort of diktat. So yeah, I'd rather not. I'd rather see much more competition in the markets, and the biggest way of doing that is to increase the supply of housing. We keep getting promised, and then there needs to be this mass house building program that goes on and retains that stock at a national level for the people.
Chris, if we could magically, I mean, this is pointing to our next show tomorrow, which is, of course, Cladding Matters, 1 p.m. If we could free up by actually effective remediation of all these many flats that are out there, but at the moment are static, are unused, or if they are used, cannot be sold or any way other way monetized. If that stock could be made available by effective mediation, would that help alleviate this housing crisis?
It would make a small dent in it, yes. Yeah, it would help. But it still needs to be a much bigger program than even the current government has suggested. That enacting that program would help significantly. But yeah, it needs to be wider, much wider, because the cost of housing keeps soaring, absolutely soaring, both in terms of cost of property, build costs, and also the rental costs as a knock-on effect of everything.
I mean, I was discussing with Michelle Carr the other week that the cost of materials has soared dramatically as well, which of course means that even with the best will in the world, putting up, creating new living spaces is perhaps becoming prohibitive anyway.
Well, the material cost is kind of, it's another area where we shot ourselves in the foot, in that we chose to close down all of our national-based manufacturing, or a huge chunk of it, and then decided to import everything. We have the resource here to manufacture almost everything. Not necessarily the skills anymore. A lot of that may be dead, but we could reinvigorate that, which would help. But I think as part of a wider program of house building, I think that could certainly dovetail into helping bring back our country from the brink.
Hamish, would you care to take us home?
I think we've got a situation here. I'm rather hopeful that one of the aspects that has been holding us back this year was the lateness of this particular sort of budget, which meant that people were not going to act. They didn't know what the heck was going to happen. They didn't know when it was going to happen. So basically that held people back from doing anything. And I'm rather hopeful that people will start seeing in the spring. And like Chris suggests, look, if you look, you can find some great sort of opportunities out there. But of course, you need to have the funding available. And that's not necessarily as readily available as it has been. However, there is a potential, but people have to wake up to the fact that they have to go about things. I mean, it's, as we well know, and again, it doesn't exactly sort of help the situation. When you look at the sort of 5 top builders were able to sort of stop the, managed to stop the investigation into their sort of holding prices and maximizing sort of prices between them. Within the sort of competition and market association, they managed to sort of bung a few billion at sort of, or a few million at social housing to get themselves out. That's really corporate. That is corporate behavior, which, so we know there had to be something there for the investigation to be taking place. Now, we don't want that forceful nature of what goes in the corporate world dragging on and just making it so much more difficult for the residents in the properties. But I do feel, I've got this feeling in my bones that something will actually happen in getting into the spring, that there will be an uplift and people will start doing a bit more.
Well, I love ending these podcasts on a positive note. Thank you for that, Hamish. Chris managed to find a chink of light where none appeared to be. Incredible. Chris, thank you so much for your sage advice, albeit not all of it positive. And Hamish, incredible chink finder. Thank you for that. And to all of you out there, thank you for following. When I suddenly noticed there was a huge surge of people halfway through and the viewership almost doubled. Thank you very much for coming along. We do this every week. Numbers of people here can sometimes swell to 5 or 6, i.e. on the show with me. But I thank you both, Chris Gilson from Root Home, HMO specialist based in Liverpool, Hamish McClay, Search Convey, absolute search specialist. Zara, friend of the show, has just pointed out one last thing. There's just not enough trained people in construction to deliver. Yeah, well, that's a sad truth. Thank you very much for that last parting shot. But hopefully next year, as Hamish says, people will start, it will turn around a little bit and we may get some movement. We do need those houses building, guys. People who are listening, I know you are, please take note. We need more houses. You can't just wait upon the cladding side to be fixed so that 5 or 6% more turn up. We need many more than that. But thank you all for reaching for the stars, and please, in this hard time of the year, but hopefully positive towards the end, look after your mental health. Bye-bye now.